There's a reason millennials experience the world the way they do. It starts in a time that didn't feel special then, but feels impossible now. You come home from school and drop your backpack near the door. It stays there. Nobody checks it. Nobody asks about homework yet. The house is quiet because no one else is home. You grab something to eat, whatever's easy, and then you leave again. No note. No message. No explanation. You just go. You don't tell anyone where you're headed because you don't need to. You walk until you find your people. Not by texting. Not by calling. You look for signs. A cluster of bikes thrown onto a lawn. Shoes piled near a front door. Noise drifting from somewhere familiar. That's how you locate each other. If they're not there, you keep moving. Down the street. Past the houses you recognize by instinct. You know which yards are shortcuts. Which neighbors don't care. Which dogs will bark but never chase. You're not thinking about safety. You're thinking about time. Time that belongs to you. You exist in long, unsupervised stretches where nothing is scheduled and nothing is recorded. You ride bikes without helmets, not as a statement, but because it never crossed your mind. You dare each other to go faster, to jump farther, to take turns riding hands-free until someone loses balance. When someone falls, it's loud and sudden. Everyone stops for a moment. You assess the damage quickly. If they're standing, it's over. If they're bleeding, it still might be over. Blood doesn't mean danger yet. Pain doesn't mean emergency. You learn that difference without ever naming it. You sit on curbs. You wait things out. You test your limits and adjust them. No one is filming. No one is archiving. By tomorrow, it will already be a story instead of an event. You get bored in ways that don't exist anymore. Real boredom. Empty time. The kind that forces you to invent something, or start an argument, or do something dumb just to see what happens. Games appear and disappear. Rules change mid-play. Someone quits. Someone sulks. Someone comes back 5 minutes later like nothing happened. You handle it yourselves. No adult steps in to explain fairness. If the game collapses, that's it. You go home annoyed, replaying the moment in your head, certain you were right. And then you show up again the next day. You grow up just early enough to remember life before everything lived online. There is a computer, but it isn't yours. It belongs to the house. It's slow, loud, temporary. You don't live inside it. You take turns. You log off. When your time is up, that's it. Your real life keeps happening elsewhere. You memorize phone numbers because you have to. You stand in the kitchen twisting a cord around your finger, hoping nobody picks up the other line. Calling someone requires nerve. You might have to talk to their parents first. You rehearse your words before you dial. If they don't answer, you don't spiral. You wait. You learn patience without ever calling it patience. You remember a world where mistakes didn't follow you forever. Where the dumb thing you said at 13 stayed in that afternoon. Where bad haircuts faded. Where awkward phases ended quietly. There's no permanent evidence. You're allowed to change without announcing it. School feels serious but hopeful. You're told, constantly, that effort matters. That opportunity is real. But the future is open if you do the right things in the right order. You believe this. Not because you're naive, but because nothing has contradicted it yet. College is described like a doorway, not a risk. Debt feels abstract. Numbers without weight. Adulthood feels far away. You assume things will make sense by the time you get there. And slowly, without ceremony, the environment shifts. Phones move from walls to pockets. The internet stops being a place you visit and starts being something that follows you. Photos don't disappear anymore. Words stick around longer than you expect. You don't notice the change all at once. You just start adjusting. You choose what to post, what to keep private, which version of yourself shows up where. Not out of fear, out of instinct. You feel the difference between being seen and being watched before you have language for it. Life gets louder, faster, more crowded. Free time shrinks, not because someone takes it, but because it fills itself. Messages, expectations, updates, things you didn't ask for but are now responsible for answering. You still carry the old instincts. You know how to entertain yourself. You know how to adapt. You know how to figure things out without instructions. But the space where you learn those skills doesn't exist the same way anymore. You remember when silence wasn't uncomfortable, when being unreachable was normal, when fun didn't require proof. That memory stays with you. It becomes a quiet reference point, something you don't talk about, but feel when the world gets too fast, too visible, too permanent. You're not longing for childhood. You're remembering what it felt like to exist without being measured. And that memory never fully lets go. The change doesn't arrive all at once. There's no clear moment where you realize something has ended. It just becomes harder to find. Time starts filling itself. What used to be empty afternoons slowly turn into obligations. Homework grows heavier. Activities stack. Expectations multiply. You're still told this is temporary, that it's all building towards something better. So you accept it. You've always been good at adapting. You learn how to move between worlds, between offline and online, between structure and freedom, between being alone and being reachable at all times. At first, the new tools feel exciting. Phones mean connection. Social platforms feel like extension, not exposure. You're not performing. You're just sharing. Photos of nights out. Inside jokes. Moments that would have disappeared before. Nothing feels risky yet. But gradually, things stop fading. A post from years ago can resurface without warning. A message can be reread, reinterpreted, replayed. The past doesn't stay in the past anymore. You start to notice this, not as fear, but as awareness. So you adjust. You hesitate before posting. You choose angles. You delete things that feel off. You become more careful with words. Not because anyone told you to be, but because you sense that memory has changed shape. Life no longer forgets the way it used to. At the same time, the future you were promised begins to feel heavier. You do what you were told to do. You follow the steps. You graduate. You apply. You work. And yet, the ground doesn't feel as solid as you expected. The ladder is there, but it's crowded. The rules are vague. Progress feels slower. Stability costs more than you were prepared for. You're working harder than you imagined, but the finish line keeps moving. Rest starts to feel earned, not assumed. Even then, it comes with guilt. Emails wait. Messages pile up. Being unavailable starts to feel like a failure instead of a boundary. You were raised in a world where effort had a visible endpoint. Fix the bike. Build the thing. Finish the task. Now effort stretches endlessly. Work spills into nights. Weeks blur. You can be productive all day and still feel unfinished. That does something to you. Not dramatically. Quietly. You begin measuring yourself more than you used to. Against peers. Against timelines. Against versions of success you see but don't fully believe in. You didn't grow up comparing yourself to thousands of people. You compared yourself to classmates, neighbors, a small circle that made sense. Now the circle is infinite. Someone is always ahead. Someone is always doing better. Someone always seems more certain. You know it's curated. You know it's incomplete. But knowing doesn't stop it from landing. It doesn't feel like jealousy. It feels like pressure. Pressure to keep up. Pressure to choose correctly. Pressure to not waste time. Because time now feels expensive. You still want depth, meaning, presence. But you live inside systems designed for speed, visibility, and output. So you learn to function inside contradiction. You become capable but tired, flexible but stretched, optimistic but cautious. You carry instincts that were formed in a slower world and try to use them in a faster one. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they don't. You remember what it felt like to disappear for hours without explanation, to make mistakes that dissolved on their own, to be unreachable without apologizing for it. That memory doesn't shout. It hums. It shows up when everything feels too loud, too monitored, too permanent. When you can't quite explain why modern life feels heavier than it should, you don't say anything about it. You just keep going. Because adapting is what you learn to do. By the time you realize something feels off, you've already been carrying it for years. It doesn't announce itself as burnout. It doesn't feel dramatic enough for that word. It feels more like a constant low-grade tension, a background noise you only notice when things finally go quiet. You're functioning. That's the confusing part. You're showing up. You're working. You're paying bills. You're handling responsibilities that once felt far away. From the outside, nothing looks broken. In fact, it probably looks fine. Better than fine sometimes. But the effort it takes to stay fine keeps increasing. You wake up already thinking about what needs to be done. Your mind starts sorting tasks before your body is fully awake. There's always something waiting. An email, a message, a decision you've been putting off. Even rest feels active now. When you finally stop moving, your brain doesn't. Silence fills with replay, with comparison, with questions that don't have clean answers. You start wondering when life became something you manage instead of something you enter. You were raised believing that adulthood would feel like arrival. like things clicking into place. Instead, it feels like maintenance, constant calibration, keeping systems running that never fully shut down. You adapt, of course. You always do. You learn productivity hacks, routines, optimization strategies, ways to squeeze a little more efficiency out of yourself. You treat your own energy like a resource that has to be managed carefully. Somewhere along the way, you stop asking whether this pace makes sense. You just assume it does. You notice that your attention doesn't rest the way it used to. Sitting still feels harder. Doing one thing at a time requires effort. Even moments meant to be relaxing carry an undercurrent of urgency, like you should be doing something else. You remember a version of yourself that could disappear into an afternoon without guilt. That version feels distant now. You still crave meaning, but meaning feels harder to access. It's buried under logistics, under decisions, under the quiet pressure to make the right choices, because mistakes feel more expensive now. You don't feel young enough to waste time. You don't feel old enough to be settled. You feel suspended between stages. You watch the world move faster around you, and instead of feeling left behind, you feel pulled in too many directions at once. Identity becomes something you're constantly refining, not because you want to reinvent yourself, but because the environment keeps shifting. What worked 5 years ago doesn't quite fit anymore. What you thought you were building changes shape, so you adjust again. You learn how to be competent in uncertainty, how to function without clarity, how to keep going without a clear sense of arrival. You become very good at holding things together, and very bad at letting them fall apart. You rarely stop long enough to feel disappointed. When something doesn't work out, you file it away and move on. There's always another step, another attempt, another version. Grief doesn't arrive as loss. It arrives as fatigue, a sense that something important is missing, even if you can't name what it is. A quiet mourning for time that felt slower, for effort that felt final, for a version of life where you could try something, fail, and not have it define you. You don't talk about this much. Everyone else seems busy too, so you keep it internal. You keep performing competence. You keep adapting. You keep telling yourself that this is just how things are now. But the memory from earlier never fully disappears. The long afternoons, the unrecorded moments, the feeling of being present without effort. That memory doesn't demand to be reclaimed. It just reminds you, occasionally, that another way of living once existed, and that you lived it. By now, you've learned how to live with the weight. You carry it well, quietly, most days, without complaint. You know how to keep moving even when nothing feels finished. You know how to exist inside uncertainty without letting it show too much. That wasn't accidental. You were trained for this long before you realized it. You learned how to adapt when afternoons disappeared and schedules replaced them. You learned how to hold on to yourself as the world sped up. You learned how to function while everything around you became louder, faster, and more permanent. You didn't lose your footing. You adjusted it. Even now, pieces of the old world still surface, sometimes in small ways, sometimes unexpectedly. A quiet evening with no plans. A moment where your phone is out of reach and you don't rush to retrieve it. A stretch of time where you're doing something simply because you want to, not because it needs to be documented or justified. In those moments, something loosens. You feel more like yourself, not a better version, not a younger version, just a truer one. The version that existed before everything demanded explanation, before availability became expected, before every decision felt like it needed to optimize the future. You don't want to go backward. You're not nostalgic in that way. You just remember what it felt like to be present without effort, to try things without branding them, to fail without archiving it, to exist without constantly measuring your progress against invisible standards. That memory doesn't make you bitter. It gives you perspective. It explains why silence feels restorative, why depth matters to you, why speed exhausts you, why you crave meaning even when you don't have the energy to chase it loudly. You're not behind. You're carrying a set of instincts that were formed in one world and deployed in another. That takes strength. And even if the world doesn't slow down, even if systems don't soften, you still have access to something rare. The knowledge that life once felt different and the awareness to notice when it doesn't. You know what presence feels like because you lived it. You know what freedom feels like because you had it. And that quiet reference point stays with you, shaping how you move, what you value, and when you choose to step back. Not to escape the world, but to remember yourself inside it.